Your government wants you dead. Now that's not some dramatic line from a spy thriller, is it? No, it's the literal, chilling text of an anonymous letter mailed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1964. And it wasn't just a letter. It arrived with a cassette tape, a recording of his most intimate, private conversations. The FBI, the very agency sworn to protect American citizens, typed that letter. They mailed it. They even gave one of the most revered civil rights icons in history an unthinkable ultimatum. Take your own life within 34 days, or we release this tape to the world. King, with unimaginable courage, ignored that vile threat. But the Bureau, they didn't back down. Instead, they doubled, then tripled their surveillance efforts. An endless stream of forged letters, constant bugs planted in every hotel room he ever stayed in, a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. And here's the thing that truly makes your blood run cold. Dr. King was only one name on a disturbingly long list. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain, sifting through the paper trail that proves, in stark black and white, that the United States government waged a secret war against its own black citizens, an operation so vast, so insidious. It had its own chillingly Orwellian brand name, COINTELPRO. So, how in the world did the most powerful, supposedly democratic nation on Earth decide that the pursuit of basic human rights by Black Americans somehow equated to domestic terror? And who else, beyond the most famous names, got caught in this expansive, unconstitutional dragnet? It's a question that cuts to the very core of American ideals, isn't it? How did the guardians of liberty become the architects of oppression against their own people, simply for demanding equality? This wasn't some rogue agent or a one-off mistake. This was a systematic, sanctioned campaign. We're talking about a fundamental betrayal of trust, a deliberate effort to dismantle movements built on the promise of justice and freedom. What kind of fear, what kind of prejudice could drive an entire government apparatus to such extreme lengths? Twisting the very definition of patriotism into something unrecognizable and terrifying. Picture this. It's 1963, Washington, D.C., 250,000 people, black and white, young and old, gather on the National Mall. Dr. King stands before them, delivering a speech that echoes through history, a dream articulated with such power and grace that it moves a nation. Newspapers across the country hail it as the biggest, most impactful civil rights demonstration in history. But inside the hallowed halls of the Justice Department, one man watches with a profoundly different and, frankly, sinister label for the day's events. National security risk. That man was J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI since 1924. A man who had amassed an almost unimaginable amount of power and an even greater collection of secrets. Hoover, a figure shrouded in his own paranoia, maintained a special, meticulously organized filing cabinet, its label, Black Messiahs, in his own words, chillingly preserved in official memos. Any figure capable of uniting Negroes and whites must be destroyed. Let that sink in. Not monitored, not observed, but destroyed. And that particular memo, outlining his twisted vision, was dated just 2 days after the March on Washington. To Hoover, the sight of black and white Americans standing together, demanding justice, wasn't a testament to democratic ideals. It was a direct threat to the established order, a dangerous challenge to the racial hierarchy he was so determined to uphold. His fear wasn't of communism, not really. It was of black empowerment, of a society where black voices held equal sway. He believed that if a charismatic leader could bridge the racial divide, it would fundamentally alter the power structure he had so carefully maintained for decades. This wasn't about national security in the traditional sense. It was about Hoover's personal ideology, his deep-seated racism, and his obsessive need for control. He saw a black messiah as an existential threat to his world, a figure who could ignite a revolution not of violence, but of dignity and self-determination, which he found utterly unacceptable. So, what exactly was COINTELPRO? The name itself, Counterintelligence Program, sounds bureaucratic and innocuous enough, right? But don't let the bland title fool you. It began in 1956, initially aimed at harassing U.S. communists, a convenient boogeyman of the Cold War era. However, by 1960, the program's mission list expanded dramatically, stretching its tentacles far beyond its original scope. Its new, chillingly broad directive was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize black movements. And let's be absolutely clear, neutralize was not a euphemism for gentle persuasion or observation. This was a license to sabotage. Agents received written explicit permission to forge evidence to plant false news stories in the media, and even, disturbingly, to supply guns to rival groups, hoping to incite violence and internal conflict. The goal was to sow chaos, distrust, and ultimately, to dismantle any organized effort for black liberation. A 1967 memo, signed by Hoover himself on every single page, explicitly targeted black nationalist hate groups. But the list of organizations wasn't limited to groups advocating for separation. It shockingly included pillars of the civil rights movement like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. Dr. King's own organization, known for its nonviolent direct action, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which empowered young people and grassroots organizing, and yes, the Nation of Islam, which advocated for black self-sufficiency and empowerment. The FBI viewed these diverse groups, regardless of their tactics or ideologies, as a unified threat to the status quo. The very act of black people organizing for their rights, whether through peaceful marches or calls for self-defense, was seen as an act of rebellion that needed to be crushed. The scope of COINTELPRO was breathtakingly vast, encompassing everything from surveillance and infiltration to outright psychological warfare and, as we'll see, even acts that led directly to violence. It was a secret war waged on American soil, against American citizens, designed to crush dissent and maintain a deeply unjust racial order. One of COINTELPRO's most insidious tactics was infiltration. The FBI didn't just watch from afar. They burrowed deep into the heart of these organizations. They recruited an astonishing 1,500 informants within the Black Panther Party alone. Imagine that. Your closest comrades, your trusted friends, secretly reporting your every move to the government. One of the most infamous examples of this betrayal was William O'Neill. He wasn't just an informant. He rose through the ranks to become the chief of security for the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. He was privy to everything, trusted with the lives of his fellow Panthers. And he used that trust to orchestrate a tragedy. O'Neill supplied the FBI with the floor plan of Fred Hampton's apartment, marking the very bed where the 21-year-old chairman slept. Then, on the night of December 3, 1969, O'Neill allegedly dosed Hampton with secabarbital, a powerful sedative, rendering him unconscious and defenseless. At 4:45 a.m., a 14-man tactical unit, a joint operation between the FBI and the Chicago Police Department, stormed the apartment. They fired 99 shots. Fred Hampton never woke up. The Panthers, caught completely by surprise, managed to return just one single shot fired into the ceiling from a dying security guard. Years later, a federal grand jury, looking at the overwhelming evidence, would call the raid what it truly was, an assassination. Yet, despite the clear evidence of a government-orchestrated killing, not a single agent, not one officer, spent a day in jail. The story of Fred Hampton is a stark, brutal testament to the extreme lengths COINTELPRO would go to neutralize perceived threats. It wasn't just about discrediting, it was about eliminating. The Panthers, despite their militant image, were deeply involved in community programs, providing free breakfasts for children and health clinics for the underserved. This combination of radical rhetoric and effective community organizing made them, in Hoover's eyes, an even greater threat. The FBI deliberately fanned the flames of internal discord and external conflict, often by forging letters to sow distrust between Panther chapters or even between the Panthers and other black nationalist groups like the U.S. organization. The goal was clear: fracture the movement, incite violence, and then use that violence as justification for further repression. The infiltration wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was about active sabotage, turning comrade against comrade, and ultimately destroying lives. While infiltration often led to physical violence, another pervasive tactic of COINTELPRO was psychological warfare. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was its primary target. His FBI file swelled to an astonishing 17,000 pages, a testament to the Bureau's relentless, obsessive focus. Agents meticulously logged his travel, his hotel receipts, and every single phone call. They wiretapped his home, bugged his hotel rooms, and recorded his most private, extramarital conversations. Why such an intense focus on his personal life? Because, as Hoover's deputy chillingly wrote, "We must mark him as a moral hypocrite before his people." The FBI sought to destroy his reputation, his credibility, and his moral standing, believing that if they could undermine the man, they could dismantle the movement he led. The infamous suicide package was just the horrific climax of this sustained campaign. But it didn't end there. Week after week, the Bureau mailed anonymous letters to Coretta Scott King, detailing alleged affairs designed to inflict maximum emotional pain and sow deep distrust within their marriage. They sent tapes of King's private moments to journalists, hoping for sensational headlines that would discredit him. They even pressured churches and organizations to withdraw invitations for him to speak, attempting to silence his powerful voice. Decades later, psychologists, reviewing the sheer volume and nature of this campaign, have unequivocally labeled it textbook psychological torture. Imagine living under that kind of constant, invasive scrutiny, knowing that your most intimate moments could be weaponized against you, your family, and your cause. The psychological toll must have been immense, a suffocating weight of paranoia and betrayal. The FBI wasn't just trying to stop King. They were trying to break him, to drive him to despair, to silence his message by destroying his spirit. This wasn't intelligence gathering. It was a deliberate, malicious attack on a human being, designed to destroy his public image and his private peace, all in the name of preserving a deeply flawed social order. For years, COINTELPRO operated in the shadows, its tactics shrouded in secrecy. But on March 8, 1971, that veil was ripped away. 8 ordinary Americans, a group of anti-war activists, decided they'd had enough. They broke into a small FBI satellite office in Media, Pennsylvania. It was a daring, almost audacious act of civil disobedience. They didn't take money or valuables, toke files. They stuffed every document they could find into suitcases and then, with incredible bravery, leaked those documents to newspapers across the country. One crucial packet landed at the Washington Post, and that's where reporters, for the very first time, saw the chilling word, COINTELPRO. The public was stunned. The revelations were explosive, detailing a vast, illegal domestic spying program that targeted not just communists, but civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and ordinary citizens. The outcry was immense, forcing Congress to act. They formed the Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church, to investigate these unprecedented abuses of power. What they uncovered was staggering. 2,370 separate, clandestine operations against American citizens. The committee's findings exposed a government agency run amok, operating outside the bounds of the law, systematically violating the constitutional rights of its own people. In the wake of these revelations, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, in 1978, ostensibly to stop warrantless spying and bring intelligence agencies under tighter legal oversight. J. Edgar Hoover, the architect of this vast surveillance state, died of a heart attack before the Church Committee hearings even finished. COINTELPRO officially came to an end. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The secret war didn't disappear. It simply went underground. The tactics were refined, the names changed, but the underlying impulse to surveil and suppress dissent remained. The Church Committee may have exposed the abuses, but it didn't fully dismantle the machinery of surveillance. It merely pushed it into new, less visible forms. The legacy of COINTELPRO cast a long shadow, permanently altering the relationship between the government and its citizens, particularly those advocating for social change. Now, let's fast forward from the 1970s to a much more recent past. Ferguson, 2014. In the aftermath of Michael Brown's tragic death, protests erupted across the nation, coalescing under the powerful slogan, "Black Lives Matter." And what was the government's response? Echoes of COINTELPRO reverberated. FBI internal reports began labeling these activists, these citizens demanding justice, as black identity extremists, claiming they were likely to incite violence. Sound familiar? Under an operation chillingly named Iron Fist, agents once again posed as grassroots organizers, compiled geotagged social media posts, and shared detailed dossiers with local police departments. The playbook, it seemed, was being dusted off and updated for the digital age. In 2017, the FBI's Counterterrorism Division issued a warning about ideological infiltration by BLM. Using almost the exact same language J. Edgar Hoover had employed half a century earlier to describe civil rights organizations. The technology had certainly evolved. Surveillance cameras were now ubiquitous. Social media provided a treasure trove of data, and algorithms could sift through vast amounts of information in an instant. But the underlying strategy, the paranoid labeling of black activism as a national security threat, remained eerily consistent. This wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a living, breathing threat. The black identity extremist label, intentionally vague and broad, a code for the monitoring and targeting of any black person or group advocating for racial justice, regardless of their methods. It created a climate of suspicion, justifying surveillance and potential intervention against movements that were fundamentally seeking equality and accountability. While modern black movements have shown incredible resilience, often decentralizing leadership to make them harder to infiltrate and disrupt, the government's tactics demonstrate a persistent pattern. The ghost of COINTELPRO, it turns out, never truly left the building. It just got a new wardrobe and a smartphone. So, why should any of this matter to us today? Because COINTELPRO worked. It wasn't just a failed experiment, it achieved many of its nefarious goals, fractured nascent coalitions, sowing deep paranoia and distrust within movements that were already fighting an uphill battle. It pushed some frustrated activists toward armed struggle, inadvertently providing the Bureau with the very justification it needed for harsher repression and more extreme tactics. The devastating result: a generation of black Americans lost faith in the electoral process and the promise of systemic change. Crucial community initiatives, like the Black Panthers Free Breakfast program, which fed thousands of hungry children, disappeared. And perhaps most disturbingly, federal surveillance law, even today, still hinges on guidelines written in 1976, born from the very abuses it was meant to curb, leaving loopholes that continue to be exploited. Meanwhile, in our current reality, facial recognition cameras are tracking protest routes in real time, feeding data into vast surveillance networks. Algorithms are actively flagging slogans like "I can't breathe" as potential threats, transforming calls for justice into data points for monitoring. The tools are more sophisticated, but the target remains the same: dissent, especially black dissent. If we don't confront this dark chapter of our past, If we don't truly understand the mechanisms of state repression, we are quite simply funding the sequel. We are allowing the patterns of surveillance and suppression to repeat themselves, dressed in new technological garments, but with the same chilling intent. Understanding COINTELPRO isn't just about history. It's about recognizing the present, about protecting our future, and about ensuring that the fundamental rights of all Americans are truly upheld, not just on paper, but in practice. If these revelations, these unsettling files, make you rethink the sanitized version of history you might have learned in school, then please hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more classified history where this came from, stories the textbooks often gloss over. And do me a favor, share this with just one person you know, someone who still mistakenly believes that government surveillance is only for criminals, or that these kinds of programs are ancient history. Let's start a conversation, okay? They wiretapped Dr. King. They drugged Fred Hampton. They forged letters that directly contributed to Malcolm X's suspension from the Nation of Islam, creating divisions that ultimately made him vulnerable. And here's the truly terrifying part. When those tactics proved effective, when they successfully dismantled black movements, the government didn't stop there. They expanded their secret war, moving beyond Black America to target anti-war priests, women's liberation meetings, environmental groups, and countless other organizations deemed subversive. The secret war never truly ended. It just got rebranded, its methods evolving with the times. So, the next time you hear a protest dismissed as fringe or radical, or an activist movement painted as a threat, remember this history? Remember that the United States government once spent millions of taxpayer dollars, countless hours, and untold resources to silence a Baptist preacher who preached nothing but love and equality. The files are open. The truth is out there for anyone willing to look. The question then isn't about what they did. The question is, what will we do with the truth?